If you are like me, then once in a while you face the problem in Randori that it is not that you do not know what to do, it is that you can't do what you know. And that's a pretty bad problem to have because getting more knowledge on the techniques that you want to do will not help you. This is what this video is for instead. So 2 years ago approximately, I would always start by bowing to the opponent and then the grip fight would start and then my mind would start talking. I would have the voice in my head saying that, oh, this technique might work here because his feet are like this and this, or I might get a better position by doing this, and then I can do this other thing and stuff like that. And the voice in my head would just keep talking and talking and talking, and I would attempt the technique that my mind told me to do, but it was too slow. It didn't work. I was slightly in the wrong position. If I tried to focus a lot on my leg movement, I would forget about the hands doing the thing that it's supposed to do. And every single time I was too slow and the situation was gone before I could do the right technique. Or I was just stronger than my opponent and I could muscle it through, but that didn't happen very often. Then the mind's voice would start talking again and say, okay, next time you need to be a little faster and you need to move a little more to the right and you need to actually go all the way through with your technique and be a little stronger. And as I would think about that, I would get thrown and once I get thrown, my mind would start talking again and say things like, okay, next time you need to watch for this leg because if it moves, you need to defend like this and stuff like that. Obviously, it didn't work because, again, it was too slow. I would think about the stuff and then I would just fall again because the situations were too dynamic to think in the slow thinking way. And you can probably relate to the thoughts that I'm talking about. Well, you may not really have paid attention to them in the way that we're doing it now. We're actually looking at them. You probably recognize them now. Probably when you're in the situation, you just take them for granted. That's just how things are. Now, at this point, I read the book that is now actually pretty much my favorite book, The Inner Game of Tennis. I actually have it here somewhere. No, I don't. It's over there. This one, The Inner Game of Tennis. The Inner Game of Tennis. And it absolutely transformed my judo. No, I wasn't thinking all the time, but I was throwing more. I was throwing more people, and when I actually hit the techniques, they would be a lot smoother. And you know that when you hit the perfect spots for a technique, when you just get the perfect position and then they go over without much power or anything. Because they already moved in the direction and you just had the perfect timing, the perfect position, and it worked. That started to happen like a lot more often, really a lot more often. I still wasn't great, of course. I still got thrown. Still, that wasn't me. That was the gymnastics ball I'm sitting on the board. So just for clarification. Ich glaube, ich schnitt es einfach raus. Okay. Of course, I still wasn't great. I still am not great at judo, but it's got a lot better. No, the question you're asking is, what did I do? Because you probably want to do the same thing for yourself. And I will tell you. But first, I think it's quite important to recognize why this is happening so we can change things and understand why it doesn't work that way. And my theory is that you probably know it. You usually have your setting where you have a trainer that talks about the techniques and teaches you, hey, move your hands a little bit more in this direction, or a little bit more power, more speed, a little less in that direction, things like that. You should relax this muscle, all these things. Turns out, from person to person, this seems to work quite well, but from the thinking voice in your head to your body doing the thing, this doesn't really seem to be the best way to communicate. And this is where we need to understand that there's actually these two parts to you. And you never thought about them. You always thought, okay, this is one. But while this sounds like you've gone mad, this is actually true for basically all people. You have the thinking voice in your head that basically gives your body instructions, and you have the part of you that acts. Otherwise, sentences like, I tell myself to move my legs in this way, or I told myself to block this throw once it happens, or something like that, would not make sense. There has to be a you and a yourself. You can't, like, it doesn't work. You have to have two things in order for them to communicate. So you have your body, you have the natural movement adapted part of you that probably existed for millions of years already, the part of your brain that controls your movements, and you have the thinking part of your brain that is very good at other things, but it just quite it doesn't really do you much good if it interferes with the movement part of your brain. And that is the crucial thing that you need to understand, that these are two different parts. And we will talk about how to make them communicate most effectively. But this is the important thing. The thinking voice in your head also has the problem that you can only really focus on one thing at a time. Just like I can only say one word at a time right now. I can't say 5 words at the same time. You wouldn't understand, and I just can't speak 5 words at the same time. So, for example, if you focus on your hands movements, you might usually forget your leg. And you probably know this when you think, okay, more power now, and then you forget to do something else. You forget to put your step in the right place or something. And then you focus on the step, and then you don't have power with your arms again. Like this, you can only focus on one thing, and the other thing never works. And it's just way too slow. That is the other thing. So what you need is flow, is what I call this chapter of the video. Every single successful athlete seems to agree on this one thing. And I've read a bunch of books on the mental aspect of great sports figures. So I, for example, read a book by the trainer of Michael Jordan, actually two by the trainer of Michael Jordan. I read a book from one of the greatest sports journalists, and he talked about the mental sides of all the athletes he talked to. I have read this thing by one of the greatest tennis coaches on the world, on the planet. I've read the book of one of the greatest trainers in CrossFit, and all of them agree on this one thing. And that is a crazy thing to consider right now. This is crazy that they all agree on this thing, because usually in sports there's so many different opinions. When you think of some technique in judo, there you have so many people saying, no, this is wrong, this is how you do it, and they say, this is wrong, no, this is how you do it, and nobody agrees on stuff because they say, yeah, it's just different for different people. But if they all agree on this one thing, that means there really has to be something of crucial importance here. And what they all say is that the best performance comes when you're not thinking. When these two are in harmony, when the voice in your head doesn't quite shuts up, when the voice in your head just shuts up, and the acting part of your body does all the work. And this way they're in harmony and don't interfere with each other. That is flow state. And at this point, everyone thinks, oh, flow state, I can't get there. It's so complicated. It's this magical thing that just happens once in a while, and then you get all your results, and you have this blissful state where you're so happy, because you've probably heard about flow state talked about like this before. But that's not actually what it is most of the time. How did you learn to walk? And that sounds stupid, but it's a serious question. You probably just always tried and failed, and you fell, and then you stood up again, and you fell again, and never really thought about it. And it's a good thing we weren't able to speak when we learned to walk, because otherwise people would have been like, no, change the angle of your arm a little bit as you're walking, and your foot should be a little bit more angled upwards, and you shouldn't have this much tension in your hip, and all this stuff. It would have been crazy had we learned to walk when we could speak already. And now you can walk without really thinking about it. You can just walk perfectly with very accurate movements that are adjusted to your situations, to the surroundings, and really get you can move perfectly on different angles that you walk on and different terrain, and maybe with some stones that are uneven and stuff. This is really a complicated job. If you had to write a program on the computer to do this, it would be really hard. But without thinking about it, you can do this. And this is flow state. You just have so much experience, and the movements focused part of your brain learned to do the perfect movements. It's really good at that. It's really good at learning movements and then put them into practice. It kind of has all your mistakes and good attempts at walking registered and remembers them, and adjusts how you do things based on that. And it also adjusts everything to your body. That is also important, because your limb length might influence how you're walking, for example. And this only happens in flow state, when you're not thinking, but lets your body figure out the most efficient way to do stuff. If on the other hand, you try to coach someone in walking and say, oh no, we'll change the angle of this a little bit, it doesn't work, does it? I think so too. It's absurd. Yet we do the exact same thing with sports all the time. But the teaching mechanisms aren't actually what we're focusing on. Right now it's about using what you already know in Randori. I will make another video on that in the future, hopefully. So. And I also want you to think about all the crazy things that your body can do without you thinking about it, if you don't have trust in that mechanism yet. Because it's quite scary letting go of your body and letting it do what it can do best. Because then you're not doing it yourself, or at least the voice isn't doing it itself. Every single day, your body wages war on thousands of microorganisms without you ever thinking about it. Right now, it's probably killing some viruses and bacteria or something with this perfectly strategized attack, where it has these many waves of, hey, first this wave of cells does that thing with the opponents, and then the next one and stuff. And it's so well coordinated, and you're always just destroying all these organisms in your body without you ever having to think about it. Yet you don't trust your body to be able to pick up a person and put them down. That doesn't seem very realistic, that it can't do that. Ja, das war scheiße, das schneide ich auch raus. I think we should have a little more trust in our body, to be honest, and not think that we need to coach it in every single thing it does. Now, how do you get rid of thoughts in order to enter this flow state that everyone agrees is the best way to practice sports, and also the most enjoyable way, in fact, because when you're thinking, you're usually less happy than when you're just acting, when you're present here in the now, in the moment. But anyway, how do you stop thinking? Now, usually we run into this problem that you probably know, where you, for example, try to sleep and then you're thinking about not being able to sleep, and that makes it more problematic because then you still can't sleep. So you probably know that when you lie in bed at night and you try to sleep, and then your mind starts generating these thoughts of, oh, if I don't sleep now, then I will be so tired tomorrow. And if I don't sleep now, and oh, why can't I sleep now? I need to figure out a solution to this. And then it starts thinking, and you're still not asleep. So that is the problem we run into. When you try to stop your thoughts, you can't do that with the mind. You can't think, okay, now I want to stop my thoughts, and they're gone. That doesn't work. Like, you can try right now, but it just doesn't work usually. And now this is the secret that this video is centered around, basically. And honestly, for just this one thing, I would buy this book. And I did, because that is the greatest thing in this book. Now, the key to that is to, well, there's more in this book, but this is one of the most important ones. The key to this is to give your thinking mind, so the voice in your head, or rather, na, das mit der Voice schnell raus. The key is to give the thinking parts of your brain a job, so it's occupied with something else. That is the only way to make it shut up. You can't do anything else about it. You need to make it focus on something else. Otherwise, it's always going to come back in and interfere with the techniques you want to do. So you need to give it a job. Now, in the Inner Game of Tennis book, the Inner Game of Tennis, there is the example of watching the seams of the tennis ball. So you know it's usually this yellow and you have these white lines going around it. And when you hit the ball, they spin really fast and they form these patterns that you see. That is what the author tells you to focus on. Now, unfortunately, we do not have tennis balls in judo, but I just came up with this myself. We have another thing you can do. By the way, there's also a second way to stop you from thinking, but I will get to that in a second. And the thing that you have is you have these patterns here. You see all the different tiny threads and everything. These form really cool patterns when they move. And that is what you should focus on in this case. And the good thing about that is that, like with the tennis ball, you're still looking at the thing you should actually focus on. In tennis, it's kind of a teaching that you should always look at the ball, because otherwise you don't know where it's going. It's kind of similar with judo, though you don't need to see. It is quite helpful to look at your opponent. Because, yeah, I think it's obvious why. So you want to watch the patterns in the judo-gi, the little threads moving and forming intricate patterns. That is what you want to look at, to distract your mind from what you're actually doing. And that frees up the space for your movement mind to actually do its job properly. And the movement mind, we've already talked about this, is the part of your brain that has been there for a really long time probably, and is just through evolution become really, really good at controlling your movements. The second way to do this is to imagine you're watching someone else doing judo through your eyes, essentially. So you're basically imagining that you look as if through the camera lens into the perspective of someone else doing judo. Because that is actually, in a way, what is happening. A different part of you that you can actually kind of treat like a separate self in many ways is acting while you're just observing, in the ideal case of flow. You're just observing and this part of you does all the actions. And this works really well, and you will observe yourself doing a lot of better stuff than you otherwise would. When you just watch yourself and think, okay, body, do whatever it takes. I will just watch. You can do whatever it takes. I trust you to figure this out. I will just watch. And then you just look through that and imagine you're watching basically just the view of this other person, basically, or this other aspect of you that you don't have conscious access to. At least not in its thought processes. You see what happens right here, right now. And now you might wonder, but will this part of me still do the right thing? Because I can't really control it, as I was used to. And the answer to that is not always. But as you learn to walk, it will adjust to your mistakes a lot faster than if you manually thought about it. Just think how much more work it would take if you had to adjust every single angle of your leg moving when you're walking every single time. It just takes a lot longer than just trying to fall and get back up and fall and get back up and eventually learning to walk. And also, you were never getting everything right anyway, but it's probably going to be an improvement because, as I said, that part of you is better at controlling movements. So if before you were here, you might be here now, and that's an improvement. That is why you should do this. Now, this is one of the most important points from this book that I forgot about in the beginning. This is so crucial, and this is so important. This is one of the greatest mistakes people make all the time in this mental stuff. Everyone always talks about positive thinking and how great it is, but it actually just sucks. It prevents you from getting into flow. And what you should never do is, after you get some kind of result, judge it as good or bad. You should never judge it, because that is automatically your thinking, analyzing, talking parts of the brain. That is never the movement brain, because it doesn't judge things as good or bad, and it doesn't think in words. And it just does, which is what flow is. So once you judge something as good or bad, automatically the thinking brain comes back in and interferes with what you're doing. Because if you think it's good, hey, I'm the strongest guy, I have this throw so strong, and you get someone thrown and you think, hey, I'm so good. Then you try to do the same thing again, and then you consciously think, okay, before I tried to move my arm like this and it worked, so I tried to do the same thing again, and then you forget about your leg. And now you messed up again, because you're out of flow once again, once this judgment happened. If you think the same thing with bad thoughts, that's the same thing. If you think, hey, this flow was so bad, I need to change my arm and do this, then you still have the same problem, obviously. Instead, you should just neutrally accept it as if you are the referee. Because the referee watches it and notices, okay, this guy threw that guy. But the referee doesn't think, okay, that is good or this is bad. They just observe and they see what happens. That is what you need to do in order to remain in flow. Otherwise, you're getting thrown out of there because your thinking brain just slaps you out of it. Without your performance. Slaps you out of it and your performance will drop. And now you might wonder, but if talking to myself does not work, how should I learn techniques? Or if judging things like good or bad, how should I learn techniques correctly? How should I learn them the most effectively? In a way that is natural for the movement parts of your body. Now, I know this sucks, but this video would get too long if I included this here. So I will post another video in the future that explains all of this. So while this is really cliche and I don't really like to say those things on YouTube, it would make sense to subscribe because of that. So you can see that video in the future, because I think it might actually really help you. It did for me. This is my favorite book by far, and it's magical what it does to your sports experience. Goodbye.